Now for the good stuff. Our guest speaker today, Bill Scott. Welcome, Bill. Let me tell you a little bit about him. Bill's the president and the chief operating officer of the Baltimore, Washington Rapid Rail and the Northeast Maglev. And it's dedicated to bringing the world's fastest, the proven mass transit technology to the Northeast Corridor, which is recognized in the United States as the most congested corridor in the country. Bill spent over 20 years in positions of increasing responsibility on an international scale through global multi-billion-dollar companies such as Black & Decker, W.R. Grace, and Cristal Global. He's been involved in significant planning and development projects, literally around the world, North America, South America, Asia, Australia, Europe, and as well as the Middle East. I can't imagine how many frequent flyer miles you have, Bill. He also received his master's MBA degree in finance from my alma mater, University of Maryland, Smith School of Finance, great school, and his undergraduate degree from right here from Towson University. Welcome, Bill. Good to have you here.
Thank you.
If we could step back for a second, Bill, and talk about, how did all this get started, the Northeast Maglev, and how did Japan get involved?
Sure. Thank you, everybody, for having me here today. I think the easiest way is kind of step back. So in the late 1990s, Congress passed the T21, Transportation Equity Act for the 21st Future, right? And the whole idea was to bring high-speed rail to America. Inside the T Act, there's a maglev deployment program. It's $1 billion, just short of $1 billion, that has been put into the program and authorized to bring a magnetic levitation system that is developed and proven to the United States because we were falling significantly behind every other country. The idea was, don't go and put in phones when you have mobile phones, right? Don't always just follow. You don't have to go from the slow to the medium to the fast. You can skip a generation, right? You don't go now buy, a touch-tone dial phone, right? You buy your iPhone. The idea with Congress back in the day, and led by Senator Barbara Mikulski, was to put this program in place to actually bring something to the United States, right? And they did that because the U.S. has been falling behind since the 1960s when high-speed rail was first put in place in Japan. The Shinkansen has been operating in Japan for over 60 years.
Wow. So
for over 60 years, never a fatality, right? So it is a much different methodology of how to operate a system and move people up and down the corridor. And in Japan, that's what they've been doing. So that's kind of, the US wanted to bring something. Japan's always had the best technology. They've been at the forefront. So back in 2010, Japan said, great, there's this magnetic levitation development program. 14 states applied for it, 7 were chosen, and only 3 came down at the end of the day to do it. Maryland, Chattanooga, and Pittsburgh. Those 3 were given the first initial study. The only one that is still viable and the only one that's still operating today is Maryland. Maryland won the whole competition and is the only one authorized to use anything in the $1 billion program by the United States Congress.
Bill, talk a little bit about Japan and compare it, I guess, to what we have here in Amtrak in terms of, safety, the number of passengers utilized, those type of things in terms of, and the speed of the train, obviously, too.
Sure, and I think it's important to understand high-speed rail. High-speed rail, the definition is 180 plus miles an hour. We don't have any high-speed rail in the United States today, right? We have Acela, which is our fastest at this point, and for about 10 minutes, it can hit 120 miles an hour on the Northeast Corridor, right? So we have a corridor problem. In Japan, they dedicated and built this system. It moves 450,000 people on its Shinkansen, which is the high-speed rail, 450,000 people a day. Acela, in contrast, moves 9,000 people a day. Put in perspective, right? Acela, Amtrak has released their latest results. 22% of all of their onboarding or trains leaving are late. The average delay for on the Northeast Corridor for last year was 58 minutes for every train. That's the average for every train. The definition for late by Amtrak is you're only late if you're over 30 minutes late. If it's under 30, you're on time, you're good, right? And they're still 58 minutes late.
And try to get your money back too if you're.
And it's difficult, and it's a quarter issue, and it's an alignment issue that has to be solved. In Japan, they put this in, they move 450,000 people, they have a train every 4 minutes. Their on-time performance over the last decade, including tsunamis, fires, you name it, is within 30 seconds, is their average. I've been there, I've ridden it. If the train is showing up over 30 seconds late, you will get a text apologizing, right? It's a very different mentality of how we run a railroad. So that's why Japan's been so very interested. Great, we have this great economy. We are the world leaders here in the United States. We're great for defense. We're great for technology and exports. Japan's always looking how to strengthen its ties with the US. It buys a lot of our technology, but what can it offer us? That's how they became involved, because they said, look, we have the best train technology in the world, the safest train technology, the most reliable, the most energy efficient. It's finally something we can give back to the US because we buy a lot of everything else from the US. So it's a strategic partner, and especially strategically it's important because they're right next to China, right? So they want to shore up their relationship with the US, which has been strong since the 1940s.
We'll talk about it. I mean, almost doesn't make sense. You know, Mikulski talked about this way back when, and when she was in the Senate. You see the results over in Japan. Why are we lagging our feet? Why is it taking so long to get this thing jump-started and make it happen? I mean, you got tremendous congestion, like we talked about, in this Northeast corridor.
Infrastructure is our problem, right? Building anything of a major infrastructure problem or trying to solve an infrastructure problem in the Northeast corridor is massive. Between our regulations, our permitting, our environmental review process, we've been working at this project since 2010, right? We've been doing our EIS, the Environmental Impact Study, since 2015, right? We published in 2021 our draft environmental impact study, right? 7 years into the study. Originally, it was supposed to cost about $6 million. $35 million later, we're only at the draft, right? Because as you go through it, you have to study everything, right? What started out as we had to study 3 alignments. The federal government and the state decided, let's study 14. And it doesn't sound like a big deal until you realize you just pissed off 14 different alignments worth of people.
Right.
Right? You were going to make 3 alignments mad. Now you did 14, everywhere from 95 all the way over to the other side of 295. So everybody in the corridor you've made mad. Then you have to do public meetings. You got to do go through the whole process, engineering and discussion. So it becomes a very long, very drawn out, very detailed. It's a very arduous process to go through. I think if anybody had warned me about this when I had started, I might have rethought doing this. But you know, we're into it, and you know, it's one of those things. It could change the way we live, so it's kind of worth going after.
So you talk about the large infrastructure projects, and I know the Biden administration, you know, that was one of their commitments that they talked about. They wanted to change the infrastructure. What's the magnitude of the new change of the new administration? Is that helping you? Is that hurting you, or the project?
So we're about 10 days in. We've seen the fury of executive orders come out and then be rescinded, and I would say it's very dynamic right now. I won't get political on it because I think it doesn't help anybody. And you know, it's one of the things we've been very careful with our company, right? We're going to take 20 some years, right? We're going to go through 5 different presidents, multiple elections, Congress, you know, Senate, state, federal, you name it, where we have to have a very neutral, bipartisan relationship, right? You know, and that's one of the things when we first got started, we put together a board which had Democrats, had Republicans, right? Has secretaries of transportation from the Democrat side, from the Republican side, has governors from New Jersey, has ex-governors from Pennsylvania, from New York City, right? Democrats, Republicans, up and down, because this is a generational type project. This isn't something that is a 1-term or a 2-term presidency. So we've been very careful at how this will turn out. We hope it'll be great. It seems the administration typically likes private-public partnerships. But again, it's too early to tell, and we'll set to see where we go. But you know, we'll be making a full court press to make sure we can deliver it, right? This is what we're here to do.
Talk about, you mentioned a little bit about this. Talk about how big this project is, and more importantly, how do you expect to finance it?
Sure. So our project now, the number grows. You've heard of all the great inflation we've had over the last couple of years. The latest numbers are this is about a $20 billion build. This is between DC and Baltimore alone, 33 miles for $20 billion. So put that in perspective, right? So that's a pretty large project. We're going through a lot of environmental justice, a lot of communities. But one of the things we've been able to succeed at is we are not impacting a single house along the alignment, right? We are going 70% underground and 30% above ground, and the 30% above ground is only on federal land alongside 295. The reason we do that is that the U.S. has had a terrible history of bisecting communities, especially environmental justice or underprivileged communities. So what we've decided to do is we've gone forward and said, look, it's more important that we can go under, it's going to cost more, but we're going to be hundreds of feet below people's houses, right? We are not going to impact them, you won't hear it, you won't see it, and we'll be below all the other tunnels that are already there that everybody likes to ignore that we don't have, like water, sewer, metros, electrical already. But the idea is to bring this impact as many people, but to remove 16 million cars off our congested roads between DC and Baltimore. Now, $20 billion is a huge number, right? So we've worked in Japan. I go over there 2 to 3 times a year. We work with the Japanese Over-Investment Infrastructure Fund, and we work with JBIC, the Japanese bank for investment for overseas, right? What we've gotten the commitment from them is to provide half the funding, so roughly $10 billion to bring all the systems, all the train sets, and all the technology from Japan to the US. You're probably saying, why would they do that? They're doing that because that grows their economy. It gives their economy, their system over there, economies of scale which they can't achieve without having a second system of doubling the number of train sets and doubling the technology over there to help grow their economy also in Japan. Now, from the other side, that still leaves about $10 billion for us to go in. There's the Railroad Infrastructure Fund, there's the TIFIA Fund, there's IIJA, there's CRISI, all these great acronyms, but what they are, they're federal government programs to provide some of the funding. And then we will do, as we go public at the end of it, is we will go raise private equity to do it also. Now, one of the things we've done so far is we've gotten federal grants from the federal government. We've had so far $35 million of federal grants awarded to the project. Typically, those federal grants are matched by state funds. 20% is the typical match. What we've done is we've always told the state of Maryland, we don't want any of your money. We're not here to distract you at all from your infrastructure or your transportation issues, which we know from the budget sessions that are going on, there's a lot of issues that need to be addressed in Maryland. So what we've done is every time the federal grant has come in, our company has assumed the 20% match and done the match as part of it. And we've worked with the state of Maryland, MDOT, MTA, to work through the environmental process to keep this going.
So the budgetary constraints that we have right now in the state of Maryland is not hurting you in terms of people coming to the table, so to speak?
No, not at all. I mean, think about it. We've never requested, nor are we requesting any money from the state of Maryland. All we're doing is we're putting between $10 and $20 million into the state's economy each year to move this project forward, right? We have not pushed the state to do any type of funding. All we're doing is we need their assistance to help move the process along, to help us complete the studies, do the public outreach, and work with the local communities, because you got cities, you got states, you got local communities. We're working with over 60 different federal, local, and state agencies going through the process. That's where we need their help. We don't need their help with raising the money to do this.
Okay, folks, I'm going to ask a couple more questions, then we'll open it up to the audience. You can ask questions of Bill as well. Bill, let's flip the coin a little bit, What is the cost, the real cost, if you do nothing, and this doesn't happen, versus if you do it, how long will it take it to become fully operational, and what would the impact then be?
Sure. So last year, a TRIP report came out, I think about March, April last year. And what it did is it looked at Maryland's highways. And what it said is, by doing nothing and doing the status quo we do today, it costs the state of Maryland $5.8 billion a year. That is because all the work they have to do for improving the roadways, lost time for people on the roads. And what they've said is, if you look at it, people in Baltimore City lose about 60 hours a year just sitting in traffic. When you get down toward the DC Metro, they lose about 100 hours a year. So think about it. You're 2 to 3 weeks, you could have vacation if you just didn't have to sit in traffic and you'd be just as productive where you are today. This is not our information. This is out of Texas trip. They go through it. And almost 30% of those bottlenecks are along the 295-95 corridor, exactly where we're trying to take these cars off the road. Today, there's 121 million trips a year between DC and Baltimore. 121 million.
Jeez.
Right? And those are trips originating, and we've all gone through these, the state studies of transportation, and then we've actually used a system lately called AirSage. And AirSage is the next generation, right? It says, all right, how do we track people? Well, the easy way to track people is everybody in here has a cell phone in their pocket. So what they do is they have access to the carriers and say, great, where's this person wake up in the morning? Where do they go during the day, and where do they come back? And they've demonstrated that 121 million trips is light. Because 121 million trips assumes the legacy data they've gotten. It doesn't include the new generation of kids who use the Ubers, who use all the other different means of traveling, which seem to fall through the cracks when you look at the transportation studies. So it's been a very big dynamic to do it. Sorry, I forgot the second part of the question.
I said, when will it become fully operational? What's the time frame once the button gets pushed?
Sure, so we've gotten the DEIS. We spent the last 6 months working with the feds, the Federal Railroad Administration, going through the comments. So 6,122 comment submissions were submitted as part of our EIS, right? And that's a huge number of submissions that have come in just because of the corridor we live in. What's different and good for us is over 62% of them were in favor of the project. Now, typically, I'm sure you've heard, if you hate something, people come out in droves to really hate something. We're good at that in America, right? Of really getting behind not liking something. The great thing is we actually saw 62% favorable wanting the project to come through. Now, as we follow that along, we've actually done polling we've done polling 5 times over the last 7 years. Just 2 weeks ago, we did polling throughout the state of Maryland. 67% of the state of Maryland wants the project in our polls. The people opposing it, only 18% are opposed. Our biggest problem is over 54% of the people have never heard of the project. Right? Hearing about the project and getting the word out is our biggest problem, especially in the lower income communities. They don't use the social media, they don't use the way that people traditionally do as much as you do it, so you have to go almost door to door or in the local papers and really change the dynamic that people want to do. So it's been a long, arduous path. And then once we start, it's about 2 years to get to the final, which would be the final EIS, which would give us a preferred route. Once we have that, we'll go get financing, which will take about 18 months to lock everything down and get everything squared away. And then the big part is, how long does it take to build? It takes about 8 years to build. The reason it takes 8 years is tunnel boring machines. The only way we can do 8 years is we're going to launch 8 tunnel boring machines. 8. Why would we do that? A tunnel boring machine on its best day can go 30 feet.
Wow.
Are you partnering with Elon?
Hey, we're not asking questions from the audience yet.
We'll come back to that. That's a good question. We'll come back to that.
It's Antonio, jumping the gun again. Go ahead.
So 8 TBMs to do it, to pull the soil out, and then we'll use that soil for remediation. Just like Hart and Miller, there's a whole bunch of construction projects in the Bay. BWI Airport wants 3 million cubic tons of dirt to expand their runways. So 8 years, if someone comes up with a better idea how to go more than 30 feet, we would pray that Elon Musk would come up with a better idea. He's been looking at it through his boring company for 7 years now, hasn't come up with one. But anybody that can come up with a way to double that would cut our build time in half. Wow. Right? So that is our big issue. And think about it. That's a huge impact because that probably would save me $1 billion in interest a year. Every year you can cut off my build time is about $1 billion in interest alone. So it would have a dramatic effect. So anybody has a great idea, love to hear it, love to partner up because that would be a huge economic boost to the whole project and the cost of the project overall.
Now, Antonio, ask your question. And Bill, if you could repeat it.
So the question was obviously Elon, he successfully bored the tunnels and opened it up and connected it to I think it was the MGM is where that boring tunnel is outlaid. How long did that take him if he's only got capacity at 30 feet to do that? Was that a 10-year project?
No, so it's a very small loop going underneath, and it's a very small. So the diameter of the tunnels that he did, I think, are about...
It's a mile and a half.
Yeah, so it's about 12 feet across, right? 12 feet across. Our tunnels are 50 feet across. Our tunnel will have 2 trains side by side and safety, escape, air passages inside of it, right? And we're building 33 miles. Our route is 33 miles, so over 24 miles of it will be underground.
How long did he get on it, though?
Well, we've tried, we've reached out to him, and even the technology he's using today, he bought their traditional tunnel boring machines when he did it. And I don't know if you've ridden it, it is not the most smooth tunnel. It's very bouncy from what I've heard and seen on the videos going through. Where at 311 miles an hour, you can't be very bouncy. This is not an amusement ride, right? So you have to be, in order to accommodate, American Disabilities Act and all the other criteria, it needs to be smooth, very aligned both vertically and horizontally, which creates its own engineering challenges as you move through.
And think about it. I mean, I was just on Amtrak last week going up to New York. And, when you're in the middle of the train, when you're walking down the pathway, you're moving side to side. And you're talking about at 300 miles, it's like walking down the street.
Yeah, it's phenomenal. If you have the choice, and I know a couple people in here have gone to Japan, ridden the Shinkansen, and a couple in here have actually ridden the maglev. Last year we took a delegation over to ride the maglev, right? Because we were down doing a minority business and women-owned business event in Prince George's County, and they said, who like us has ever gone and ridden a maglev, right? Who has actually seen it? Who can actually testify? Because we don't think this thing's real, right? And despite the videos, despite all the technology and everything you watch the difference, we said, okay, great, we'll prove you wrong. We took a group of about 10 people over from the NAACP, the Greater Baltimore Urban League, the Hispanic Chamber with Marco here, and a bunch of different other people over, and we took them to ride the Shinkansen. You can stand and walk, you can put a glass on the table in the Shinkansen and walk away, go to the restroom, come back, it's still on the table. Wow. You can't do that on US Rail. I'm not gonna name names, right? You go ride the maglev, we have video, you can see it on our website, of the group standing up, not holding on to anything, while going 311 miles an hour. So it's a very different dynamic, and if you have the ability to do it, or ride the ones in Europe, which are almost as good, do it. It will change your perspective. That is what high-speed rail or mass transit should look like.
Amazing. Marco, and can you repeat the question for the video after Marco asked it?
Well, I can confirm that, 311 miles per hour, you couldn't even feel anything. And one thing that they do that they never done before, they decided to stop the train on a turn. And if you're not traveling, we were like basically slanted like that. But if you're traveling, then you feel like you're flat, which is amazing. I have a couple questions, Bill. Can you talk about the contribution to the state of Maryland once this is done in terms of creating jobs, also in providing opportunities for small businesses in terms of the percentage that you allocated to make sure that small businesses are included in this project?
Sure. So I'll take the last one first. So what we've done is we said, we are going in Maryland, right? We have to be a good corporate partner. We are not your traditional transportation company. We are going to do it right. So what we've committed is put over 40% of our build to minority and women-owned businesses. That's $4 billion, right? So what we have done over the last 15 months is we've gone to host and co-host, different minority events inside at Coppin State, at Morgan State, up and down the corridor to sign up these groups, these firms, and get them into the program. The problem is, I can't wait till I start constructing. At $4 billion, I probably could absorb almost every minority business in the state and come nowhere near my $4 billion. So the point is, we have to build a pipeline, we have to build the groups, we got to get them registered. Because there's a process, whether you're in DC, it's different than Maryland. If you're in Maryland, it's different than if you're operating in Baltimore City. And then there's the whole federal regulations on top of that. It's not easy. So what we've done, and then there's bonding, then there's financing, and then you got to have your commitments to be able to do it and win the contracts. So what we've done is we've reached out to the different groups. We brought the groups in that do minority bonding, right? Groups that can do financing and get the people so they have their financials in place to do this, start working on it now. So 2 years, 2.5 years from now, they're available to start bidding and winning it. So that's kind of the first thing. Just from the build alone, it will add about $8.8 billion in labor earnings to the state of Maryland.
Wow.
It's 161,000 job years spread over 8 years, so it's about 20,000 jobs spread between professional and construction jobs. There's engineering, you name it, I need it. I need carpenters, engineering, electrical, mechanical, HVAC. I need guys that can do construction. I need roads. I need bridges. I need environmental remediation. I need solar, because we're committed to making this as much as possible a green transportation system. One of the things we have done is make sure that there's a green solution, not that we're relying on someone else. So even in our EIS, we have proposed putting solar farms out in Western Maryland that can power the whole system and make it truly a green solution. And the best part about it is at night, when wind's still blowing, but we're off doing maintenance, that will power the grid for Maryland, for Marylanders in general to still work on it, right, and power the green. Right now, the state of Maryland spends about $40 million a year to other states to buy their renewable energy credits because we have dirty energy in the state of Maryland and we can't put in green energy fast enough. So the idea is to change that dynamic and come up with a transportation solution that'll hit it all. And the other idea is it also puts jobs out in Western Maryland, right? Garrett County. Our company, the way we originally got involved in it is when Japan was looking for a partner in Maryland, they had one American board member who used to work for the affiliation. He was a Naval Academy grad who happened to be the roommate from freshman year of our CEO.
That's great.
Right? Our CEO has done 40 hydroelectric dams around the globe, 13 different states, 13 different countries. He also did the last 2 windmill farm projects in Western Maryland. That's how we got involved in this, because they said, how can we do this, make it a green initiative, and someone that's done infrastructure type projects in the state of Maryland. So he called his old roommate up, and they brought him to Japan, and then worked through the different ministries and the Prime Minister's office over there to make that connection, and that's how we got involved in the project. I think I answered all your questions.
Other great. Yeah, Dan. Then the other Dan.
Are there going to be new stations for this? I know it has to be an independent railing system. So are there going to be new stations built for this, or are they going to, and if not, how are they going to integrate with existing stations?
Sure, that's a great question. So let's talk about the alignment real quick, right? The current alignment, the 33 miles, is you start in DC, you hit BWI Airport, you stop in Baltimore. Then you turn around, you start in Baltimore, BWI, back downtown. 3 stations, 3 brand new, 3 separate, distinct stations. Why is that in DC? We want to be downtown DC. So right now, the station that's been approved for the EIS is right near the Carnegie Library. If you don't know what that is, it's the Apple store right on New York Avenue. Right? It's just shy of that and stops before it goes under it, because if I go under it, I got to be an extra 100 feet deeper. And you're saying, why is that? Because the Green Line Metro goes under that. There's water lines, there's sewer lines underneath it, and I got to be 50 feet below the next thing above me. That's how you build a tunnel. You have to be one width of your diameter below whatever's next to the top to you. So they're 3 separate, 3 new. So DC along right next to on New York Avenue next to Carnegie, BWI Airport, and then there's 2 options in Baltimore, right? One South Baltimore in the Cherry Hill location, and then there's one in the Camden Yards, and that's up to the Federal Railroad Administration. They get to pick which one. I think I answered both your questions. Yeah. Great.
Yeah.
Dan 2.0.
Dan does PR type of work across the country.
I'll follow up with you about how to get you publicity. But I have a question about maglev. If a maglev train is going 300 miles an hour or 200 whatever, and the electricity goes off, what happens? I mean, does that not metal grinding on metal, or what happens?
So I appreciate the question, because there is no metal. There's no metal on metal. This is a maglev, right? You're thinking steel wheel on steel rails.
Right.
right? Maglev doesn't have it. So maglev sits in a U-shaped guideway. So it looks like this. It's concrete, 6-foot wall, 6-foot wall. What you have on the side of each wall are magnetic or electric coils. Not even magnets, electric coils. When you run electricity through that and it reacts with a superconductive magnet, that's what levitates the train. If you lose electricity, there's actually 4 different safety features on it which can bring it to stop if you don't have electricity, but it stays in the guideway. There's no ability to derail a maglev system, right? It just will coast in it, and when it hits about 80 degrees, it drops down and hits its regular rubber wheels, just like a jet plane's wheels, and will coast to a stop. But there are manual brakes, and there's what we call the Mickey Mouse ears. And what they are, on top of the train, there's 2 flaps that pop up, like the jet thrust reversers on airplanes, that pop up like air dams and will slow the train down also.
Bill, quick question. You know, I'm not an engineer by a long shot. When you're going underneath, you said, I don't know how deep you're going, 100 feet, and you're going below the subway line. What keeps that, with its heavy rains or whatever it is, what keeps that in space, and that it doesn't fall down and hit you or you cause damage to them? How does that work?
Yeah, so general rules of TBMs, right, tunnel boring machines, and I'm not the engineer, my son's the engineer, and I'm sure there's plenty of them in here that can explain it better than I can. If you want a tunnel bore, right, you have to be 1 diameter, the equal width below the surface. So at minimum we could ever tunnel bore is 50 feet, because our 50 feet. That way you don't have any deformation or foundation issues or anything else, is the general rule. We are in Maryland, there's a lot of water, so we will have to take about 5,000 tunnel boring samples along the alignment to figure out, what are we boring into? Is it bedrock? Is it water? Is it shale? Is it loose ground? Is it hard packed? Is it sand? And then you will launch a TBM that's specific for that type of soil going each way. And like I said, we're launching 8 of them, so you can launch one that does specific or hard rock one way and one that does sand the other way. But each of them is put together, they're sealed with rubber gaskets, and then while it's being sealed, you actually inject a grout around it, which will seal it again to do it. But you don't have that stabilizing problem when we're typically 100 to 150 feet below ground, which is usually pretty solid earth even there, because we're not going under the bay or out in the ocean where it's deep water.
Other questions? Jason?
Yeah, it's a powerful project. I'm curious, any estimates on what the ridership cost would be for somebody to get on, what the fares would be?
No, that's a great question. So what we've always said, and the analysis we've always done, it's going to be $1 a mile on average, right? So just like Amtrak, just like the airplanes, there will be dynamic pricing. So if you walk in the station at 7:05 at the busiest time of the day without a ticket or a reservation, you might pay more than that. If you make it a week ahead in advance, you'll be a discount, or you do it at off-peak hours at 11 a.m., it'll be about $1. So about $30 each way. Okay. Now let's put that in perspective. MARC, you ride it today, the cost of a MARC ticket is $30 today. What we don't realize is the state government, our taxes, pay for 2/3 of the ticket, which is why you only have to pay $9 to $10 on a given day. So whether we ride it or not, we're subsidizing the MARC. So what we said is we're about equal to what it will cost, and then it'll be about $30 to do it, and that's consistently what we're seeing.
And I'm sure with the fundraising, how many riders are you modeling? What's the ridership at that price point?
Sure, so what we have, so like I said earlier, we have 121 million unique riders going up and down the corridor every day. What we're targeting is to divert only 12%. Almost all from autos is where our study is from. So we're looking to, at the very first year when we're getting up and running, we'll do about 12 million people, and probably about by the 5th year, we'll do about 16 million. Now, we will be running initially only once every 15 minutes. Right now, if you want to grab MARC, you get maybe 1 or 2 an hour, Amtrak's 1 an hour, Acella's 1 an hour. We're going to do every 15 minutes, so there'll be a lot of flexibility. We can go down to every 6 minutes as we scale up. And that'll be important when phase 2 is the idea is, all right, we build phase 1, we got DC, we got Baltimore, the US finally has real ultra high speed rail and people can see it and feel it and get behind it. Then we go Baltimore to New York City. And when we do that, that connects DC to New York in 1 hour. And when you do that, all of a sudden that ridership becomes important, that I can scale down from 15 minutes down to 10, and as ridership, I can go as low as every 6 minutes, each direction.
Wow. Tom?
Why is it important for you guys to get the word out? Well, I mean, how does that help you in the project to have the citizens of Maryland better understanding?
It helps us out dramatically. Put it this way, right? Everybody always hears that the greasy wheel gets squeaked. The squeaky wheel gets greased. Yeah, that's what it is. Sometimes it's backwards. But what you have is, I mean, we have some people who don't like change, right? But they're great at calling and, calling the governors, calling every group and saying, look, I don't want it, just funnel the money into Amtrak, right? Amtrak just got $60 billion.
Wow.
2 years ago. That's more money than Amtrak's ever gotten in the history of Amtrak combined, right? And they got that to spend. So, and that's only to bring it up to a state of good repair. That's not to make it high-speed rail. That's just to make it safe and working and operable, right? So that's kind of the big thing. And our biggest thing is when we're going in and talking to whether they're state representatives, legislators, senators, or federal legislators from Maryland, wherever, first thing they want to know is who from my district or jurisdiction is behind the project. What have you heard from my people? So we have over 61,000 people that have signed up to support the project at this point, right? And what we do is we then go in, when we go into, if it's Prince George's County, Baltimore City, Anne Arundel, or DC, the first question we're going to get asked is, who from my voting jurisdiction supports the project and what? So what we do is we have a big CRM, like everybody does, right? A big customer relationship management. What we do is we sort it and say, look, in your zip codes, we've addressed this, and you have 5,000, 2,000, 1, whatever the number is, that like this project and want to do it. And the same thing with the minority business and the businesses like yours that sign up. When I can go in and say, look, I got 50 businesses that represent $50 million in revenue or $100 million in revenue that provide hundreds of jobs or thousands of jobs, that gets a lot more attention of how I move people around quicker, because if they can get employees to work quicker, because I took 16 million cars off the road, so now all of a sudden, Prince George's County, they always complain, I'm not getting a stop. And I said, yeah, you don't take an airplane from BWI to Prince George's down to Dulles, right? That defeats the purpose of high-speed rail. You can't get to high speed if you stop every 5 miles. What I can do is I can improve everybody's commute, because if I take 16 million of those cars off the road, you now can get to work 20 minutes quicker or half hour quicker every day. And the biggest piece is, you take 16 million cars off the road, a third of the pollution in the state of Maryland comes from car exhaust. You want to help out the communities. Baltimore City and Prince George's County have the 2 worst pollution due to automobiles. The biggest way to affect them from an environmental and a health is by taking cars off the road, because they're just sitting there on 295 doing 30 miles an hour and going, and the toxins go. And the maglev train, what they've done is 2 million tons of greenhouse gases would be taken off the system.
So a serious impact.
So
Yes,
how do
Tiffany?
we help spread that information out to our communities?
No, I appreciate it. And what we do is, if you have a group that would be interested, we're glad to talk to you. Chambers, we work with all the time. What you'll find on your table, there's a QR code. The best thing you can do is sign up to support the project and hear about it. And it provides updates every once in a while. So I give you permission to pull out your phones, click the link, the QR code, sign up. And if you have a business, sign up to the business one, because when I go looking for someone that's doing, whether it's HR or environmental work or landscaping, first thing I'm doing is going to our database, right? Because those are the people we want to get to first, because if they've been here helping us, we're going to do that. And we've done that in the past. We try to, as we make connections, we're reaching out to those groups and giving them first bid. We have done things all this year. We did an economic study. We had one of the minority businesses in Baltimore City come help us. We just repainted the front of our building and did that. We went to our database and found one of the groups that signed up during our MBE event, and we did that. So we're trying to go to them first so we can start farming out. And if we don't know about you, I can't reach out to you, and then it's like going back to the old school yellow pages, and I'm just hunting pecking. So really sign up, find out more, and make it part of the conversation, right? I know a lot of people have a lot of influence. They talk to the governor, the mayors, legislators. Make it part of the conversation. Just bring it up and say, I like the maglev project. How can I get you behind it? No more, no less than that. But keeping it in the conversation helps us out dramatically. Thank you.
Time for one or two last questions. Antonio.
Are you collaborating or speaking with John Corfiatis at Blast Tech by any chance? Do you know him?
I do not know him, so I would say no at this
I'll
point.
talk to you on him. He's somebody you need to talk to.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Last question. Vasilios.
Thanks for coming out, appreciate it. I guess my question is, it sounds like you're gonna be profitable, quite profitable, and so why don't you just raise the money and do it right away? I mean, I'm listening to this and I'm like, I hear a lot of, other things you're doing, which are great, but why not just drive ahead and put it in, and then they're gonna be riding it no matter what based on what you told us.
If it was easy as raising the money, we'd be done already. The money part's not the problem. You've all heard this, the big campaign thing, permitting reform. The permitting is a nightmare. It's difficult, it's cumbersome, it's lengthy, and the timeframes and the ability to get stuff done is a nightmare for a large infrastructure project that hits 3 counties, 2 cities, has to deal with Army Corps, and you name everybody in between the two, right? The environmental impacts, right? There have been federal rules set down, great, it can't be more than 50 pages and it's gotta be done in 18 months, right? Well, that's great until the federal government says, ignore that. Yours is 4,000 pages, it's 5 times the cost, and it took you 6 years, right? That drops a lot of people out of trying to do big, ambitious things like that. So I agree with you, we could get the money, that's not the problem. The problem is the hoops before the money becomes important. You gotta have your EIS, right? You gotta have the Surface Transportation Board give you your ruling. You gotta have your safety rules, right? One of the biggest problems is there are no rules for high-speed rail in the United States. There's definitely no rules of how to run a maglev ultra high-speed rail in the United States. So we have to do that from scratch, working with the feds and teaching them how do you slow down a maglev train? What is maglev, right? And it's these things that cost a lot of time and money because as you do it, the FRA asked us to do a helium study at one point. Nothing to do with maglev because one of the FRA officials went to Party USA and they didn't have any helium. And they said, well, how are you going to use helium to cool your superconducting magnets if you don't do a helium study? So we had to spend $50,000 to do a helium study, which was never supposed to be done, and it's not in short supply, not a problem. And guess what? We've already developed technology, no longer need helium, where we're going to use something else. And liquid hydrogen, that's a quarter of the cost. But these are the things you run into, and they don't stop coming. And then you hit a point where, oh yeah, well, it's been 3 years. Why don't you go refresh everything and basically start over, right? And this is why big projects run into the call it the buzzsaw, if you will, of getting things done. It's not the money. It's getting everything up to the money where you got to go to the bankers, right? Because we've done 5 ridership studies. We know the alignment. We got engineering firms. We're going to have one of the biggest projects. That's the problem, getting to that point where you can take the money and start building.
So do you think that all these connections you're trying to build an awareness are going to cause these permit gurus to give you a permit quicker? I mean, what's going to make them give you the permits faster?
Well, I mean, we got to live within the system we've have in the United States. So at this point, we're 7 years into a permitting and EIS process. We're working with the Federal Railroad Administration, state of Maryland, right? It's just making it a priority where, before Amtrak and the FRA, that they are the biggest customer of the FRA, they get number 1 priority. And, we did have, the Biden administration was big. I mean, there's a reason it was called Amtrak Joe, right? He loved the system. So you have to be able to break into that and make it a priority to get it and get the A team, right? You can't be getting the C team, which just drags things out and then makes bigger issues for to solve. So that's what we're working with both the prior administration and the new administration on.
There is no Amtrak Joe anymore. So
This is true.
is it just a trip to Mar-a-Lago that's left for you?
I have not been down to Florida. But
Okay.
we work with the new administration. That's what we do. We made great strides under the first administration. That's when the EIS and all the first work was done.
Okay, final question for you, Bill. What's the one thing that you maybe would have done differently or not done at all as you reflect back in your position with your company? What's the one thing?
That's hard. I think we would have tried a lot harder to get the environmental impact statement done with a lot more buy-in from the local jurisdictions, because as you run through the process, the feds and the states take the priority and kind of go where they want to go, and they tangentially consult the local jurisdictions and the municipalities that really, at the end of the day, are the ones you have to deal with. So if I had to do it over with, I think I'd do a lot more grassroots and making sure that's secure, because the state of Maryland and the feds see the big picture, but the big picture is not the problem that gets you stuck. It's the small details as you're going through the communities. It's the myths in the communities of, you're taking my house, right? And we have a project that's not taking a single house in 33 miles.
Wow.
But the number one question I keep going is, you're taking my house. My house is going to fall down. My house is going to be impacted. And it's those things, and dealing with that, it takes, if we'd been a lot more out in front of it, that would have probably solved a lot of our headaches and made this go a lot more smoother.
Bill Scott, everybody, thank you so much.
Thank you.